This is a true story. Every word you're about to hear is based on real events, real people, and real memories preserved across generations. Out of deep respect for the privacy and dignity of those involved, the names in this story have been changed, but the emotions, the loss, the hope, and the unanswered questions, those are all real. This is a story about a grandfather who vanished into history, a grandmother who never stopped wondering, a young Russian girl who saved countless lives, and a family that, decades later, still searches for answers. February 1945. The city of Breslau, Silesia. Today we know it as Wrocław, Poland. But in 1945, it was still Breslau, a German city of nearly 600,000 people, about to become one of the last battlefields of World War II. On the 13th of February 1945, the Soviet Red Army surrounded Breslau. Hitler declared it a Festung, a fortress city that must never surrender. Inside those walls were thousands of soldiers. Among them was a German engineer, let's call him Friedrich. He was 34 years old. He had a wife back home, a little girl who called him Papa. Friedrich never came home. There was no death certificate, no notification from the military, no grave. He simply vanished, another forgotten statistic in that terrible war. His wife, let's call her Anna, waited for months, for years. Eventually, she emigrated to America with their daughter, carrying only memories, photographs, letters, a diary, a small cardboard box of military decorations. She died decades later, never knowing what became of the man she loved. But this story isn't just about Friedrich. It's also about a young Russian girl, a teenager whose name we may never know for certain, whose fate remains a mystery, but whose courage and humanity shine through across the decades. This is their story. To understand what happened to Friedrich, you need to understand Breslau in 1945. By February 1945, Nazi Germany was collapsing. The Soviets were advancing from the east, the Americans and British from the west. Berlin would fall within months, but Hitler, in his madness, refused to surrender cities. Instead, he declared certain strategic locations as Festung fortress cities that must be defended to the last man, no matter the cost. Breslau was one of them. The siege begins. On the 13th of February 1945, Soviet forces completely surrounded the city. Inside Breslau were approximately 40,000 German soldiers, including Friedrich's engineer unit, plus hundreds of thousands of civilians. The siege would last 82 days until the 6th of May 1945, the day before Germany's official surrender. 82 days of constant artillery bombardment, 82 days of street fighting, starvation, disease, and death. The human cost. By the time Breslau finally surrendered, the city was in ruins. Approximately 6,000 German soldiers were killed. Another 23,000 were wounded. Thousands more were taken prisoner and sent to Soviet camps where many would die. Civilian casualties were even worse. An estimated 80,000 civilians died from bombing, starvation, disease, or in the chaotic evacuations. And somewhere in that carnage, Friedrich disappeared. Anna received no official notification, just silence. The kind of silence that leaves you suspended between hope and grief, never quite able to move forward. The last surviving member, according to family records, Friedrich was the last surviving member of his engineer unit. Think about that for a moment. An entire platoon of men trained together, fought together, ate together, joked together, all gone. Every single one, except Friedrich. Until he wasn't. The war didn't just take Friedrich. It took his entire brotherhood, every man he'd served with, every face in the old photographs Anna kept in that cardboard box. Among Anna's treasured possessions was one particular photograph. It showed Friedrich and all the members of his engineering platoon, taken somewhere in Smolensk, Russia, probably in 1941. The photo is haunting for two reasons. First, not one of those men survived the war, not one. Second, standing among those doomed soldiers was a young Russian girl, probably between 14 and 17 years old. She has a sad expression. She's staring at the soldiers, almost as if she could see the future, almost as if she knew their fate. Who was she? Anna believed, based on Friedrich's letters, that the girl was a captured Russian nursing student. Her name, transliterated from German letters, was something like Katya or Katerina. But Russian names written by Germans in the 1940s were often Germanized, making positive identification nearly impossible decades later. Friedrich had written about her. He called her our sweet little Russian baby angel because of how many Russian and German lives she saved while working in a nearby field hospital. The battles of Wyazma Bryansk. To understand how this girl ended up with a German engineering unit, you need to know about the battles of Wyazma Bryansk in October 1941. These were massive encirclement battles on the Eastern Front where German forces surrounded and captured hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers. The numbers are staggering. Approximately 665,000 Soviet soldiers were captured. Hundreds of thousands more were killed. The girl, let's call her Katya, somehow survived that butchery. She was young, she had some medical training, and she was captured. An impossible choice under international law. Because of her age, Katya could have been released. But she chose to stay. Why? Because the German doctors at the field hospital were overwhelmed with thousands of casualties, Russian and German both. And Katya was saving lives. Think about the courage that took. She was a teenage Russian girl, surrounded by the enemy, in the middle of a brutal war. She could have gone home. Instead, she stayed to help the wounded regardless of which uniform they wore, protected and cherished. Friedrich's letters describe how his unit and the German nursing sisters became extremely protective of Katya. They made sure she had a safe place to sleep. They made sure she had enough to eat, no small thing in a war zone. She essentially became part of their divisional staff. Officers invited her to the officers' mess to ensure she was properly fed, because she would often share her food with Russian patients who had nothing. In the middle of a genocidal war, in a conflict defined by hatred and brutality, these soldiers and nurses created a small island of humanity around one brave teenage girl. After the war, Anna tried to find out what happened to Friedrich. She tried to find out what happened to Katya. She found nothing. Friedrich's fate. Friedrich's name doesn't appear on any casualty lists from Breslau. He's not buried in any known cemetery. There's no record of him being taken prisoner. He simply ceased to exist in February or March of 1945, somewhere in the ruins of a besieged city. Maybe he was killed in the fighting and his body never recovered. Maybe he was captured and died in a Soviet prison camp. Maybe he was one of the thousands buried in unmarked mass graves. Anna would never know, and that not knowing is its own special kind of torture. Katya's fate. What happened to the Russian girl is equally mysterious. After the war, the Soviet secret police, the NKVD, were not kind to Russians who had worked with Germans, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of how many Russian lives they'd saved, regardless of their age. Collaboration with the enemy was treated as treason. The punishment was execution, or the Gulag. Did Katya survive the war? Did she make it home? Or was she arrested by the NKVD and sent to a labor camp, punished for the crime of saving lives? The family has tried to find her. They have what they believe is her full Russian name and place of birth, carefully transliterated from old German letters. But so far, nothing. No records. No confirmation. No closure. The weight of not knowing Anna spent the rest of her life carrying that weight. Two people she cared about, her husband and the brave girl he'd written about, both gone. Both fates unknown. She came to America, she raised her daughter, she built a new life. But she kept the photographs, the letters, the diary, the military decorations in their cardboard box. She kept Friedrich alive the only way she could, through memory. Look again at that photograph from Smolensk. Friedrich and his engineering platoon. Young men in Wehrmacht uniforms, most barely in their 20s. All dead now. And among them, Katya, a Russian teenager with sad, knowing eyes. What does that photograph mean? It's not a picture of heroes and villains. It's not a simple story of good versus evil. It's a picture of human beings caught in something larger than themselves. Soldiers who didn't start the war but were forced to fight it. A girl who chose compassion over safety. Some of those German soldiers may have committed atrocities. The Eastern Front was a place of unimaginable brutality, where war crimes were routine. But they also protected a Russian child. They made sure she ate. They valued her life. The complexity of war. This is what war really looks like when you get close enough to see individual faces. Not armies, not strategies, not ideologies, just people, trying to survive, trying to preserve some shred of humanity in an inhuman situation. Friedrich wasn't a monster. He was a husband, a father, an engineer who wrote letters home about a brave Russian girl saving lives. Katya wasn't a traitor. She was a teenager who chose to help the wounded, regardless of which side they fought for. And yet, both of them were swallowed by history, forgotten, lost. Today, almost 80 years later, Friedrich's grandchildren are still searching for answers. They've combed through military archives. They've contacted historical societies in Germany, Poland, and Russia. They've tried to trace Katya's name through Soviet-era records. So far, nothing definitive. Why does it matter? You might ask. Why does it matter? The war ended 80 years ago. Everyone involved is dead. Why keep searching? Because memory matters. Because Friedrich and Katya were real people, with real lives, real hopes, real fears. They deserve to be remembered as more than statistics. Because understanding individual stories helps us understand the true cost of war, not just the numbers, but the human beings behind those numbers. And because perhaps, somewhere, there's still information waiting to be found. A record, a document, a grave. If Katya survived, if Katya somehow survived the war and the NKVD and the post-war chaos, she would be in her late 90s now. If she's still alive, what a story she could tell. She saw the worst of the war. She saved lives on both sides. She showed courage and compassion when those qualities were rarest. She deserves to be remembered. She deserves to have her story told. This story doesn't have a neat ending. There's no closure, no final answers, just photographs, letters, and memories passed down through generations. But here are the questions this story raises. How many other Friedrichs vanished into history, leaving families with nothing but silence and grief? How many other Katyas showed extraordinary courage in impossible circumstances, only to be forgotten or punished? What does it mean to remember a war? Do we only remember the famous battles and famous generals? Or do we also remember the individual human beings, the engineers, the teenage nurses, the ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances? And here's the question for you. Do you have stories like this in your own family? Stories of relatives who went to war and never came home? Stories of courage and loss that have been passed down but never fully told? Tell us in the comments. Do you have family members who were lost in World War II or other wars? What memories have been preserved in your family? Should we do more to find and identify missing soldiers from past wars? How do we honor those who showed humanity in the midst of war? Because these stories matter. Friedrich matters, Katya matters, Anna matters. They were real people, living through the worst war in human history, trying to preserve some measure of decency and humanity. If you know anything about the Siege of Breslau, or if you have information about Russian medical personnel who worked with German units in 1941 to 1945, please reach out. Somewhere, there might be answers. Somewhere, there might be closure. And if Katya somehow survived, if she's still alive or if her children or grandchildren are watching this, know that you are remembered. Know that your courage mattered. Know that decades later, on the other side of the world, people are still searching for you, still hoping to say thank you. This is a true story. These were real people, and they deserve to be remembered.